So, welcome to episode 5.
Number 5.
Yeah, of Oneness Radio. So, we were actually talking before this, and then we kind of just stopped ourselves and said, okay, we should start podcasting or start recording now because we're pretty much getting into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, what were we discussing, actually?
And we're talking about sort of the different sources of inspiration that we find and listen to, mostly on YouTube, actually. And so we were talking about a particular channel.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. I was going to, yeah, I can't remember the thread of thought that I was on, though, of why I wanted to mention what I want to mention. So I was going to actually mention that the way kind of like I'm going at it now is that, like, yeah, mysticism, right? It's a hell of a thing to try and express, right? So, like, for anyone that wants to get, beyond the outward appearance of their own religion or spirituality and wants to actually have the type of experiences that the people who start these religions or the icons of these religions have spoken about, when people want to go into that part of it, it becomes something very different because you are now moving into a realm of experience, expression, and being in the world that is associated with, lack of mental stability. And so it's a hell of a thing for someone to actually kind of look into this stuff and from an earnest perspective, right? And be like, okay, well, I've been tested. I'm not crazy. This has interest for me. I'm not doing it because I'm, a wounded soul or I'm in lack of anything. I have a genuine interest in understanding the true nature of my existence, and not just in what can be found through the senses, and which is the scientific, pursuit, right? But the nature of consciousness itself, like the question of not what am I, as in like, there's a body there and there's a brain and everything, but that sense of being itself, the sense of awareness of existing, that you know that you are, and that you're a being with continuity. And that continuity doesn't always have to match up with your memory, because you continue even through deep sleep. You continue even through dreams, right? So there's consciousness there, and then the awareness of, you could say, the consciousness's awareness of itself is always, seems to be moving around to different degrees, but there's some kind of sense of continuity there, whether it's recorded or unrecorded. And so to kind of look into the nature of what that is, like what's really going on here, I think that's a heck of a thing to try and get into, and also to try and express, like when you're doing it, why you're doing it, and to try and live a life where you're trying to, have this pursuit, and then trying to live a so-called normal life, right? At the same time. And I think a lot of people won't understand it. A lot of people might understand it and have ideas about it. But at the end of the day, it's something that you're going through yourself, that you can kind of have shared and parallel experiences and, ways of seeing it with people. But at the end of the day, it's this inner intuitive thing that's very private, like, as in intimate, it's something really deep within inside of you. But at the same time, it's something that, like, one may come to realize that everyone is in the process of doing anyways, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what their existence is. Trying to, even if you're not trying to think spiritually, you're still trying to figure out what you're doing here and what you're supposed to do and what meaning it has, and try to derive some meaning from one's own existence.
Yeah, it's interesting. So once I found that I came to know what I was, it seems so simple and obvious and just always there, to the point where you're just like, well, don't you see it? You know what I mean? Like, you're just thinking about other people. Like, don't you see how simple this is, right? And I think it takes a little bit of sort of breaking it down into smaller chunks of understanding. So the way that I look at it is, we talked about it before in a previous podcast when we talked about unconditional love. And we talked about how most people are running on an unconscious mind. And what I mean by unconscious is there's no awareness that the behaviors that they exhibit or the emotions that they feel or the thoughts that run through their heads is basically a pattern that's being played out, right? And they're unaware of this, and so the pattern continues to play itself out as it's based on its own condition, right? And then the first step on the quote unquote spiritual path is the recognition of this, right? So to realize that, okay, hold on a sec. I'm not these thoughts that are just running through my head. And I don't actually have to play those out. I don't have to let this pattern continue to play, because a lot of times these patterns are detrimental to myself and those around me, and they cause a lot of suffering, right? So I don't necessarily have to act that out, right? And then there's this realizing that, okay, well, if I'm not that, what am I, right? And there's this sense of I am, this sense of presence, right? And that's the first sort of stage that I say of quote unquote awakening. Yeah. And that state is basically the state of I am, right? Which is the state of felt being without any sort of condition attached to it. Yeah. But there's still a further stage than that, right? Stage, strange word, but I guess you can look at it that way. And that's the that even the feeling of I am can also be perceived, right? So you can see that once you get to this stage, you can see there's a flipping from unconsciousness, where the pattern and program are just playing itself out, to a sense of I am, where you're watching those things happening and you're detached from them. And then there's the awareness that all of that is taking place in, right? And then when you try to place your attention, right, on that, is indescribable, right? That's the unmanifest. That is the pure sense of oneness and being that everyone is. Yeah? And it can't be known. You can never know what that is, because your thoughts and even your sense I am take place within this. And so that's the first step, basically, although it's the first and last step, I feel, on the spiritual path, right? Is to know that, right? And then I felt that since I've come to realize this and know that space, the person who is myself continues to, act out in the world, do their thing, go to work, have relationships with people. But I guess that's saying, to be in the world but not of the world. It's a perfect way to describe that.
And so is there any benefit to this?
Yeah, so there's absolutely there's no benefit and there's great benefit at the same time. It depends from which place you say that from and you feel that from. So if you're saying it from the place of awareness, of pure undifferentiated consciousness, it has no benefit because everything is just one. And it doesn't ultimately matter from that place whether you know it or not, because you are that anyway, right? However, on the flip side of that, from the place of the being, the individual person, there's great benefit from that, right? So once you can step back, even that first step back from unconsciousness into presence, you realize that a lot of the psychological suffering that you go through is basically self-inflicted, right? So just by being present and aware of what you're not, right? That alleviates so much suffering within yourself. And by doing that, of course, it relieves the suffering of people around you, which is amazing, right? And so that's where the great benefit is for the human being, right? But for the pure consciousness that you are, it loves you, or you, it's so hard to say it loves you because it's not like that at all. It's just pure love. So it doesn't matter whether you're unconscious or you're present. The human being is still loved by that pure, unknowable, eternal space where all things arise.
So I guess when people start to get into spirituality or look for an answer to life, what they've really done is they've kind of learned, and they've kind of like taken up a scientific process or a scientific approach to life, all upon themselves, so to speak. So you have scientists looking for the unified theory, right? The equation that, is an expression for all of existence, right? And then spirituality seems to be trying to do the same thing, or the spiritual seeker does. They're trying to find an answer, or let's say, what is the way in which I can look at life in order that it always makes complete sense to me at all times? So is there an answer to the nature of existence itself, which I can be privy to, which I can come to know or experience, that now makes the entirety of any experience one has completely understandable, completely kind of like acceptable, right? So it's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. There's never any confusion. There's never any anxiety. There's never any worry about what's happening, because you're in a sense of almost complete security, complete control. And if you're honest with it, it's your mind that wants that, and the mind gets security through knowing and understanding. And so the mind is asking, I want to understand what I am. I want to understand the nature of reality. I want to understand what's actually happening here. I don't want it just to happen. I want to know what's happening and why. Right? And that's the demand that the mind puts on what's happening. And so I find that that's what kind of spirituality a lot of people that get into it, or anything where they want to deepen their understanding, is They want a perspective or a view or an attitude with which to approach their life or experience through which everything can be explained. Mm-hmm. What is that one magic pill, or what is that one magic answer, right? Or what is the right perspective to have on your experience that makes the whole thing completely understandable?
And does that mean that people, once they find this, they won't experience any hardships in their life? Everything will be sweet and smooth sailing?
No, not that at all. I mean, that when the hardships come and when the ups and downs come, that they're completely understandable because you understand the nature of experience and reality itself. Just like I know if I throw something up in the air and it comes down and hits me on the head, I don't go, I understand why that happened, right? So even though it's still happening, I'm like, oh, of course that happened because I threw something up in the air. And then I stood underneath it, right? So I'm not going to look to the heavens and go, why, right? Why didn't it just, disappear when I threw it up in the air? Because there are certain things that I'm aware of, laws of gravity and stuff like that, where I can explain that, right? So there's a certain sense of, of course, that's why that happened, right? But I don't think when one looks upon the entirety of all the information they're privy to and the experiences they had, there is the question of why is any of this happening, right? So it's a deeper question is, why is the law of gravity the law of gravity? Like, why is there gravity at all, right? Like, what's actually happening here? What's the nature of this stuff we're living in that we call reality, that we call real? What's that? What's that? What is it, right? And what am I that can know it, right? And what am I without anything to know? Is there a me that exists separate from the things that I know? And if so, how do I experience it? Because I can't know it based on what we just said it is. It's one in the absence of the things that they know. So it's like knowing without anything to know. So what's there to know then? Besides yourself. So it's the absence of knowing anything besides yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you say that, I turn inward and I'm sort of right in that place of unknowing, and constantly the mind tries to grab onto it. Oh, that's it. That's it. Oh, that's it right there. But that it just can't be known. It's crazy, but it's a place of pure peace. And you can see why so many people have issues trying to describe this. Like, it's just...
That's why I said it's a hell of a thing to try and express these things. And from when you're interested in it until the point upon which you attain whatever it is, all the expressions that happen between that point A to point B, right? Or point A to point A, I should say. But the all that happens in that, once you take that road of expression, so to speak, as a thing existing, you're going off the grid, really, when it comes to the normal map of general human consciousness. You're saying, I'm going off the grid. I'm going into the unknown, right? I'm going into the places where no one looks, right? I'm going into the places that might make me look crazy, but I'm going to keep my sanity and somehow do things outside of what is accepted as authentic or real, right, by the general population, right? Because you're looking for something, right, that's not within the goalposts, you could say, of what life goals and things to aim for in life are, as far as most of the population is concerned. Your pursuits are no longer worldly, right? If you're sincere about it. What you're looking for is something that is an experience which happens from the inside out, right? And it's something that happens within you. And that if it does happen, like, no one else will know except you. So what you're looking for has nothing to do with outside. It has everything to do with you as a universe within, as a contained thing, right? You're trying to come to some kind of internal balance, peace, understanding, enlightenment, right? That makes everything else make sense, because you're looking at everything from the correct point of view, from which nothing is a mystery, right? And, take this for what it is, but I would propose that perhaps everything is a mystery if you think you know what you are. But if what you are remains the mystery, then everything else becomes clear, and the mystery is gone from it. I know why you laugh.
So do you find that, or had you found that as you were approaching this sort of ultimate place of unknowing, that your experiences, let's say, with the ego and the mind, were extremely resistant to that? Or do you still find that as you try and bring yourself to a place of centeredness and stillness, that fear comes up, or resistance to it in some sort of way, whether it just be random automatic thought, or tiredness, or things like this?
Well, if I look at, like, it's weird. Like, so when I do it myself, if I feel like, I think we talked about this in another podcast, where, I start with mantras if I feel a lot of disturbances, right? There's lots of rippling and, it's hard for the mind to settle down. I find a good mantra, right? And I have a few that I've picked up from different sources, right? And I use those depending on the mood, and I'll know which one is the right one for that day, because it'll immediately hit that point where I'm like, okay, that's that heart space. Okay, I'm in the heart space now. So sometimes it's not even a mantra, it's just a few words of remembrance, right? So something like earlier we're saying, the mystery goes away if you're the mystery, right? Mysticism. Why is it called mystic? Because you're the mystic, you're the mystery. It's a mystery. It's not called a mystery for no reason, right? So what if, the mystery all goes away if you accept that you are the mystery? And then look at life with no sense of yourself that can be known. You will always remain a mystery, so to speak. And so then you'll have no position with which to actually take a view on anything. Things will just be happening neutrally. It's almost like the plight of the mind is that there's lots of things happening, and they're all happening. And some things that happen are better than other things that happen. based on this guideline, this reference point. And that reference point is what you call yourself. That's what you build yourself upon. You build your opinions upon it. You've drawn a line in the sand of consciousness somewhere and said, this is the measuring stick by which I shall now judge my experience. And so there it is. And you have that measuring stick. You can see it. It's there, right? All the time. And so what if you were to erase that line in the sand of consciousness? What of your judgment then? What of experience then? So it's almost as if having an idea about what you are and then saying, this is me, by kind of sticking the essence of what you are and putting it in a bottle, so to speak, putting the genie in the bottle, right? Is the cause of all the confusion and the seeking and the searching and the ups and the downs, right? But once you let that out, there's nothing for up to be referenced from, or down to be referenced from, or good to be referenced from, or bad to be referenced from. And then the question arises then, if someone were to have this happen to them, right, then they could do bad just as well as good, and it wouldn't matter to them and they wouldn't care. And then it actually saying that good or bad does not matter now. Then who cares if a million people die over here or, a million people are saved over here? Who cares? Or not who cares, but it's no different.
Yeah.
And so this is what the individual wrestles with at some point.
Yeah.
And says, what? Well, what about that? Right? And, how many people have been martyred for just such a question? If nothing matters, then we can throw you off this cliff and you don't care, right? If you're so wise, right? If nothing matters, then we can, burn you at the stake and it shouldn't matter to you, right? Or if nothing matters, then it shouldn't matter. Here, put a sword in your hand and let's go, pillage this town. Nothing matters. It's the same.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the biggest things that you have to be mindful of if you're seriously considering this path and you're walking this path. That is definitely something that comes up. That once you sort of have that maybe brief glimpse of awakening where you merge with the one and you feel that it doesn't matter actually. It doesn't matter if I suffer. It doesn't matter if I'm happy, right? And so if you slide back into unconsciousness, you may have that tendency to say, well, it doesn't matter at all. I'll just do whatever I want. But you have to be mindful not to let those thoughts and behaviors to take hold, right? And just keep coming back to that space, right? That's the biggest thing. Just keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back, right? Never think that you have it, that you've got it, right? That you've got there and then that it's all over, right? That's just a form of ego in itself. Yeah? And you'll find that from my experience anyway, that once that awakening sort of happened for me, that there was a natural tendency to want not to do any harm, to want to do good, despite the fact that it seemed like nothing mattered, right? But there's this outpouring of love that comes out of the being, right? And compassion to those around you, right? That you want nothing more than to help them find that space, right? And I find the best way of doing that is to bring your conscious presence into alignment with the whole. Yeah. And let the whole express through this form. Right? And then you'll notice that there's no drive or want or need to do anything that would be quote unquote bad in the normal world. Right? It's the opposite. In fact, it's amazing. So if you're on this path and you get to that point, don't let it become nihilism, right? Just continue to come back and sit down and stay in that space of present awareness. And let those negative thoughts and tendencies wind themselves down slowly, but internally. Yeah. Don't let them act out externally.
So, what you're expressing then is that one who is in this place of not knowing or removing of the ego or going beyond fear, then acting from that place will naturally have an expression in space-time going forward that has the appearance to someone looking from the outside that doesn't have an understanding of what's happened. Outwardly, they would have the appearance of a good person, that we would call, or a saint, as a natural side effect of finding peace within. So the process, you could say, people put themselves through of trying to be a saint on the outside without having come to that peaceful realization of unconditional love within, they're going through a form of self-torture because they're trying to conform to something outside that inside they're railing against a lot, and then it comes out in different ways. And you see the results of it in people that are extremely religious
or social activists as well.
Yes, things like that. And then there's an extreme dark side that comes out if they're challenged, right? And so it seems like a side effect of trying to go from the outside in, as opposed to have your actions come from a place within that are in alignment or natural for one's level of understanding, as opposed to forcing actions and ways of saying things and going about your life that are, you could say, not in alignment with your level of inner understanding or awareness or peace. And it's a form of self-torture. It's not natural. It literally isn't natural for you. So there's always going to be stress on yourself when you're trying to do it in that sense. And that stress will have to be expressed in some other manner. And it usually comes out unconsciously sometimes because people are, at the same time they're trying to conform to these outer appearances that's out of alignment with what's going on with them inside. They are telling themselves that they're a good person and that they're not bad, and they don't have this stress and they don't have a dark side that's building up as a response to the stress they're causing themselves. So it's not in their inner monologue, their inner dialogue. And so they're unaware of it. It's unconscious. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's that they haven't spoken it into awareness within themselves. So there's for lack of a better term, it's self-ignorance. And so there's a great deal of compassion for, anyone, that's trying to make their life better, trying to increase love with the best of intentions, and trying to conform their outside behavior, right? And that's always helps because, it's good to give you guidelines and stuff. But you're going to feel friction if it's not happening on the inside at the same time. And for some people, it works, but for some people, it can be torture. For some people, it can turn them off of spirituality altogether. Because they might say, I've done so well, and then they lapse back into old ways. And they think they've lost everything. So in this body-mind's experience, that seems to be the experience of many people around it because it comes from a very Christian background, right? And everyone's trying to be very, 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 very religious, Christian-wise, but there's such a dark side to it, and a very judgmental side to it that gets expressed but overlooked, even though it goes against what is preached. But that seems to be like the status quo, or a common occurrence. So it's commonly overlooked, right? And I think it goes, and it doesn't come from a place of badness, or you say meanness, right? It comes from an earnest of, well, I'm trying to be good. I'm conforming to this, and now you're not conforming to this, so you must be bad. So in order for the world to be good, they must conform to the way I'm conforming to things. And that's how I'll make the world good. And when that, obviously will lead to friction when you move outside of a certain circle, and then that puts you at odds with people as opposed to bringing about more unity. And so the whole thing is very complicated from the perspective of trying to do it from the outside in. Internally, it's a simple step almost. But just to take that simple step internally, it seems like we must go through the motions of playing out this external and internal drama before we can finally literally take a step within, right? A lot goes into that step, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? So there's just a lot of compassion there. That's why I'm always just saying meditation and compassion, because that's all one is really left with, right? To deal with these things. Like I said in something I sent you earlier today is, I don't want to get into the habit of conquering old thoughts with new thoughts, right? Because, the victory does not lie in conquering and vanquishing one's enemy. The victory lies in peace. If I defeat my enemy, right, all that really happens is they lay low until they've gathered forces again and come back. So this process of an inner battle where you're winning, this thought wins over that thought, or this way of being wins over another way of being, it never causes any peace. It just seems to further or just change the form of the conflict, right? Because we're not dealing with the nature of what's happening. So all this is to say is that, I would propose to anyone trying to conform outwardly through their lifestyle and words and conduct, that are trying to conform outwardly to a system of spirituality or religion, to take the time to apply all the teachings inside yourself and see the results as compared to trying to only apply them outside yourself, whatever that teaching may be, right? So the Christians all say, take the whole Bible and then turn it and apply it as if it was spoken to help, or this was someone's internal journey. And then they wrote it down as a story expressed outwardly.
Yeah.
What's happening inside that person, you know, and then apply that inside yourself. And then for me, that's when the scriptures of all great religions and unknown ones come to life. They literally come to life within you when you start to apply them within, as opposed to trying to express them without. So, you know, compassion to everyone, and whatever your highest goals are, whatever your highest morality is, whatever you think the highest good is, I would say, you know, trying to express these things in the world has goodness in it, but taking those same things, ideals, and then not expressing them, but living from them, applying them to your own internal world, to your psyche, and to your emotions, and working with them to become more aligned with them inside, taking the time to do that, may naturally bring about expressions in your life that you were putting so much effort into to try and get, to squeeze out of life. They may come by, and they may come to you naturally, just as an effect of what you now are living from, right? As opposed to trying to live up to. And so compassion. And that's when compassion really takes on another meaning too, because if one actually tries to do this, they're faced with an internal struggle that when one's going through it, you know, all kinds of things can be expressed outwardly that seem erratic or, you know, sporadic or unexplainable. But really what's happening is inside you're going through something. You're trying to work something out. You're trying to come to something, and you've never done it like that before. So your expressions aren't predictable, even to yourself.
Yeah.
And so a lot of compassion is necessary to give people space to go through that journey. A lot of compassion is necessary to give yourself, right, the space to go through that journey. Yeah. There's a lot of lack of judgment and forgiveness that's necessary. And so, you know, greater compassion at all times, expanding your idea of what love is and what that encompasses. Forgiveness, right? Is just it's just a good way of being, because even if it's expressed outwardly, it creates an environment in which other people are now free to go about this process within themselves and not feel like it's going to cut them off from their physical, you know, their visceral humanity.
And compassion has come up a lot in this podcast, and I guess that's something that we sort of have to look at as well, like what that means. So for me, you know, compassion isn't just feeling sympathetic towards someone when they're suffering or they're hurt. It's more about, like we spoke about in a previous podcast, about unconditional love. It's the same sort of thing where it's not necessarily saying it's all right that happened. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's all good. You're just playing out your patterns. It's not sort of that internal dialogue. It's that space that you occupy when You allow all things to happen. That is true compassion there, right? And as you're saying earlier in this podcast, when you become that place of pure mystery, then you understand the world completely, right? And compassion is really just true understanding, right? And so when you're being compassionate to others and yourself through this process, just continue to come back to that space and center yourself, right? And allow the madness to happen. It's okay. As you said, it can be a serious struggle for a lot of people who are first approaching this, right? More from the reason that a lot of people just haven't really been introspective, and they haven't really been aware of the internal diatribes and conflict and all these things that are happening. That's just everyday normal experience in their unconscious experience. So when they first become aware of this, it seems like it's craziness. It seems like it's madness, and it seems like you can't get a hold of it, right? But if you give yourself the time, right, to sit in that place of pure stillness and let those things express themselves, right, and don't fight them, right, then they can finally have the love and compassion that they have been looking for this whole time. And a lot of spiritual seekers, what they're looking for is happiness, but it's not really that. Although happiness may be an expression that you feel when you live from the place of mystery. Yeah. But all I can say is don't chase happiness. It may be the driver that pushes you to move towards liberation, right? But that's just something that you'll have to throw away eventually as well. And just keep coming back to stillness.
I sometimes experience the mind's surrender to the stillness. This may be an experience of people listening too, is that there is an anxiety that arises from the stillness itself in the mind in the form of boredom. Lack of stimulation, the fear of lack of stimulation. And so the mind kind of says boredom, boredom, boredom. So fill it with anything but silence and stillness. And so your mind will race to 100 different things, 1 million different things, actually billions and trillions of different things, the entire universe. It'll run to anything it can grasp onto in those moments when you're trying to sit down and be still. And it will give you anxiety in the form of boredom. Or you could say uncomfortableness with lack of stimulation. Lack of something to hold on to and grasp. Because like we were saying before, is What is the mind without something to know? What is the mind without something to grasp? What is it? What is the mind without the mind having something to grasp onto and hold and know? The thing itself, which only function seems to be to know. What is that thing without anything to know? And so perhaps this might be the liberation people speak of, is that the mind free of anything to know is set free. Because then it can be itself. It's almost as if the mind takes the shape of the objects, or the objects of knowing that it comes upon. And so it knows itself through those things. And when it starts to know itself through those things, it starts to think that's the only way it can know itself. And so when it starts to drop everything, say all of its contents, right, and look at the space in which those contents are being, you could say, considered or known, when it looks at itself and drops everything else, there's a certain anxiety, because one is now, after I don't know how long, saying, I'm going to now approach something that requires me to not know anything. For the mind to know or contemplate itself. Turn inwards upon itself. Or turn outwards beyond its objects of knowing. So it liberates itself by literally, I guess, being itself. Without anything else. So its nature is liberation. And it liberates itself by knowing only itself. And yet it is always itself, so it's never in bondage. Is what I might propose. But I don't know.
It's just amazing, sort of like, as we're speaking about this, it just sort of naturally drops you into that space. And it's like there's a release of just like this low level of tension. Yeah. That the body seems to be holding on to, or the mind seems to be holding on to. And like you said, you're just left with pure stillness. And you can't know what that is. but it's your true experience that's always there. That's the one constant, while everything else is fluctuating and changing in the manifest universe. It's the one thing that's always there. And I don't know what it is. But it's the only truth there is. So do you have anything else to bring up before we finish off?
The sweetness of being without knowing. Sweet is what I'll say. So, yeah, to anyone listening and to everyone out there, sweetness, compassion, forgiveness. Sweetness, compassion, forgiveness. To yourself, in your internal meditations, most of all.
Fantastic. So, this has been another podcast with Cayman and Ev and Oneness Radio. Hope you enjoyed the show. And stay tuned for the next one.
Peace, Ev.
Peace out, Cayman.